Hi, my name is Dr. Maxie Gluckman, and I am excited today to share with the IFN and IREX community more about art-based creative methods for research. We're going to learn about 3 different groups of methods and the ways in which this might be able to be applied to understand impact, programmatic development, and inform database decision making. So let's dive right in. Let's first ground ourselves in the why of art-based creative methods. When done well, they have the capacity to support the generation of local knowledge and new ways of understanding that traditional methods, such as surveys, focus groups, and interviews, may not be able to capture, particularly in contexts where linguistically and culturally, art-based methods might be more relevant and authentic for participants. And this helps promote more leadership and ownership in the co-creation of knowledge by shifting power away from researcher-led processes towards participant-led or co-led processes. Another part of art-based creative methods is that they can help people explore and express meaning that might otherwise be hard to put into words and capture from these things alone. So the act of making art actually becomes a way of knowing and reflecting throughout the process of engaging in the method. And a critical point is that art-based creative methods are not just about the collection of data. And this is important as we think about trying to mitigate extractive data collection processes, but they can actually support the participants by fostering positive self-awareness, connection, insight, well-being, and in some cases have even been shown to support collective action. So that's the why. Now let's talk a little bit about the how. And we're going to go through various examples of this grounded in research that will hopefully give you a better perspective of why and how this might be relevant to your context. So the first thing is to invite participant-driven reflection in creative ways, drawing from a diverse toolkit. And hopefully today we'll add at least a few of these to your toolkit. This can include anything from photography, drawings, letter writing, to journey mapping or comic book creation. This is not an exhaustive list, but gets us started with some ideas of how this might be relevant for the context in which you're working. And a powerful strategy is to offer choice. Offering one or multiple forms of expression can help promote participant agency, interest, and engagement in research. Another key point is that it's important to invite participants to describe what their art represents, to allow them to tell their story using the creative method as a tool. While the actual art that might come out of these activities could be utilized as a data point or a resource and something that you can highlight, what is critical is that participants might have a different understanding of that. And so we really want to ground that in the participant voice as much as possible. And we'll talk a little bit more about that on the next slide. And as you go through a process of implementing these methods, just like any other research method, you want to think about where you may be able to practice flexibility and adapt to participants' interest, comfort, and context. So just being aware and being able to be perceptive of participants, making them feel welcomed and connected to the research at all times. Some ways that you might be able to consider that and think about the ethical considerations behind applying art-based research creative methods is that not all methods and questions will feel right for all participants. A process of ongoing consent, so checking in, does this still feel good? Do you still want to do this? And offering research participants the opportunity to skip topics or certain activities and decide how they prefer to participate are powerful strategies to ensuring that they are in the driver's seat of these research processes. One thing to consider with art-based creative methods is that it could make anonymity more complicated if art is shared, especially if the participants are taking photographs that include others or may showcase things that may make it easier to identify and connect research to participants. And if anonymity and data protection is important in your context, that's a consideration you want to take and keep in mind. Another point is that it's really beneficial to regularly check interpretations of data with participants, peers, or colleagues, and this can help to avoid biases or misrepresentations. You may see something in an art piece that you think represents a certain impact from a fellowship activity, and actually they may understand it differently. And so really grounding in that voice, as we spoke about earlier, is a powerful practice when implementing. Data triangulation when using art-based creative methods can be really valuable to lean on some of these other pieces, such as interviews or focus groups, to really deepen the context of understanding that you have around the data. And in that process, reciprocity is key. So following up, data sharing, and check-ins can help participants feel valued, heard, and respected throughout and beyond the research process. These are just some quick tips that you may think about as we transition into looking at some practical examples of this. So I'm going to walk you through 3 different types of methods or categories. This is not an exhaustive list, but can help you get those ideas brewing about ways in which you might apply this to your day-to-day work. So visual methods can help participants express experiences, growth, and insights that might be difficult for them to capture with words. And as you see here, some examples include journey maps, photo voice, collage, and timelines. What I invite you to do before moving on is just to put this into practice before it leaves you. It's an opportunity just on your own, if you want to pause this video, to write down what you were doing professionally 1 year ago, 3 years ago, and 5 years ago. And you can share as much as you feel comfortable with in the video chat. This is a backwards timeline. And as you do this, you may reflect on how a similar type of question and reflection might be valuable in a participant fellowship setting. It's a quick activity that allows them to either draw or map out a timeline or write, and whatever, if you prefer, to look at the way in which their professional endeavors and fellowship experience may have adapted. So I hope you paused and practiced that. Let's dive into some practical examples out from the research community. The first one is an application of photo voice, which was utilized for critical reflection by social work students in a graduate field seminar. And they used this tool to reflect on field placements, allowing them to invite critical self-reflection and group dialogue. Throughout the process, it actually helped learners connect their lived experiences with identity and growth. And you can see on the right in the table, the photo prompts, that it's actually asking them to describe their picture, to describe what's happening, which goes back to what I talked about before, that the participants are the ones to shed light and tell stories with their photo. We're not interpreting it for them, but we're inviting them to utilize that art-based visual method to provide opportunities for us to improve this social work practice, as they did in this study, or to improve the fellowship in the case of the IFN network. Let's look at another example. So in this research study, they utilized visual timelines in community education, using drawings and timelines to explore experiences and practices of sexual and reproductive health in rural South Africa. This process helped participants trace personal journeys and changes over time, and offered a low-tech inclusive method for group learning and feedback. As you can see over here on the right, and we will be sharing all of the full articles so you can expand more in depth, this is an example of one of the participants' journey map, and it illustrates the ideal clinic experience from their perspective, including the reception, the support, the nurses. And this can help inform community decision-making by understanding the journey mapping that an individual might take going to a community health clinic. The third and final example for the visual methods section is a practice in which AI and photo voice was used to map community needs. So youth photographed community spaces to document urban challenges and heritage potential. And they co-created visuals using Midjourney AI to turn their ideas into future visions. So it's a bit hard to see here, but you can see a photo of a Grecianic area of Calabria, and this was the initial photo. And then they utilized AI with prompts to create what it could look like. And this process strengthened youth engagement in civic design and helped communicate proposals to policymakers by utilizing photos and AI to project their vision and community needs. So as we think about these three examples in the context of the IFN network, I invite you to consider how visual methods could be valuable for understanding fellows' experiences, community needs, field placements, and how you may be able to apply these. We will be sharing a Google Doc that has some ideas that we developed collectively during the workshop and some others that we have prepared, and we invite you to add your ideas to that document so that we can continue to think about art-based methods and how they may be applicable to our work. So let's move on to our second set of methods. We're going to talk about narrative methods. Narrative methods encourage participants to share stories and reflections through writing, audio, or creative storytelling formats to surface meaning and emotional depth. And some of the examples that might be included in this are letter writing, voice notes, poetry, and creative storytelling through written or audio. So before you move on, I invite you to pause this video and take a quick moment to practice with this. Write a short story about a travel or a professional experience that led to change in your life. Okay, now that I know everyone has practiced, we invite you to share those in the chat of this video if you're willing and want to connect more with community. But this is just a quick example of how these narrative methods can be they don't have to be time intensive. They can be quick. You can implement that at various points, and it can lead to interesting understandings about how fellows and community members are understanding the fellowship process and program. So here's an example in practice. The NeuroLive mobile digital storytelling was an effort that invited participants to create mobile stories with voice recordings and images to share cultural narratives at museums. So instead of individuals going to a museum and reading all of the information on the walls or following through a process that might be set out by the museums, they invited community members to storyboard, narrate, and play back these stories of how they understood the museum experience and how they understood cultural narratives. And what this did is it emphasized local voices, self-representation, and access, utilizing mobile devices and adapting to different literacy levels. And as you can see on the bottom here, this is a figure that shows kind of the sequence of chapters in a story as presented in the NeuroLive experience. A way in which this might be applied to the IFN network that we talked about during the earlier workshop is that we could invite fellows to create these digital stories of their cultural background, their community, the needs that they have, and it becomes a compelling way through their voice to understand what it is they're trying to change, or even to capture their fellowship experience and to document it and share out at the end or afterwards as alumni and how it's impacted them in their community. So just to get some ideas percolating around the implementation of narrative methods. Let's move on to the video and demonstration method. So video and demonstration and presentations can be used to share knowledge, showcase skills, or communicate lessons learned, helping to make abstract concepts tangible and visible. So some examples include video, presentations, theater, demonstrations. This can take various different forms. And yet again, I'll invite you to practice this and actually just to act out something you learned recently without words. And we did this during the workshop, and it was a fun way to just see how just visually you might represent something. So you can do this with some of your colleagues and see whether or not they are able to guess. But I'm going to teach you something with hand motions and see if you can guess it and add it in the chat. So this is something I learned how to do recently. If you're not sure what it is, well, the throwing back was an extra added. You can guess, but it's just an interesting, quick way in which a fellow could even teach you something that they learned in an engaging moment during a workshop or at a follow-up. But we'll dive into how we can do this a little more in depth as well. So in one example, the Voices of Vaso project, youth filmed short documentaries about community issues and ecological change. Participants led all steps, including scripting, shooting, editing, and screening films locally, and this helped elevate Indigenous knowledge and strengthen community-led advocacy. And you can see on the right here, different steps of that process, from the storyboarding to the filming, and you can check out those films on Blue Ventures. And this idea of collaboratively building these videos could apply in many ways to the fellowship as a way of them bringing back videos of their experiences on exchange or in their communities, and determining how they can use this to influence policymakers or others that they're trying to make changes in their community. It also could just be a way of capturing a story of change from a fellow's experience, how it's changed them personally. So participatory video can be very powerful and something interesting to explore within the IFN community. Okay, so those were our three main sections and types of art-based creative methods. At any point, you can pause and go back and review more of these examples. We'll be sharing with you the Google Doc that you can look at different ways and ideas and add your own ideas to that, thinking both about the strengths of each of the methods as well as the stretches and how it might be challenging to implement and the support that we might be able to provide in doing so. But before you walk away from this video, I invite you to commit to your own application plan, to think about what is just one art-based creative method you're considering exploring with your community and how you might be thinking about applying it. If you're not ready yet, you can bring that question back to your team, sort through the different resources, and reach out to us for support. But this is an initial commitment just to think about the application and the ways that it might be beneficial for you and your professional work. And as you're doing so, we'll just bring this conversation to a close. That before you leave this in the chat below in the video, we invite you to share just one word that describes what stood out to you today, and one word, what do you still wonder? If you can't do it in one word, we welcome all of your thoughts and ideas, but it's important to take closure, to think about just how much you have invested in terms of time and energy and thought into this conversation and the IFN community. It is such a pleasure to work with all of you and to continue to develop research skills and knowledge for improved fellowship programs and better support for all of those that we serve around the world. Thank you very much. I'm Dr. Maxie Gluckman, signing off and looking forward to connecting with you all one-on-one.